They say there was a time when the world was golden. Empires rising like giants from the dust, temples touching the skies, artists, scientists, and philosophers shaping the soul of civilization. But here's the thing. No one tells you who paid the price for all that glory. Behind every marble statue, there was a whip. Behind every scroll of knowledge, silenced voices. Behind every golden crown, blood. We call them golden ages. But golden for whom? Was it golden for the slaves who built those palaces? For the women whose names we never learned? For the villages burned in the name of conquest? This isn't just history. This is a myth, polished, romanticized, sold as perfection. But history doesn't sparkle. It bleeds. So today, we peel back the curtain. We question the legends. We dig up the bones, literally and metaphorically, to ask what really happened during those so-called golden times. Because this isn't a tribute. This is a reckoning.
The myth of perfection. What are we not told? Golden ages sound nice until you zoom in. You know how Instagram makes people's lives look perfect? Filtered faces, sunset views, avocado toast so pretty it deserves a museum spot. But behind the scenes, chaos. Messy rooms, awkward moments, and probably some burned eggs. History is kind of the same. The so-called golden ages are like those perfect Instagram posts. They look flawless in books, museums, and documentaries. But when you zoom in, oh boy, it's not always pretty. Let's talk about the stuff they don't tell you. The golden glow effect. There's this sneaky thing humans do. We idealize the past. When people talk about a golden age, they usually mean a time that felt better, simpler, and smarter than today. But what they're really doing is highlighting the best bits and sweeping the messy parts under an ancient rug. Think of it like a highlight reel with the bloopers cut out. Sure, there were big achievements: science, art, architecture, and shiny empires. But those things didn't appear out of thin air. They were built on the backs of people who usually didn't enjoy them. The kings and poets get the credit, while the farmers, slaves, and servants get forgotten. And let's be real, if history had a behind-the-scenes documentary, it would be full of violence, inequality, and some very questionable hygiene. History is edited for your comfort. Most of what we call a golden age is based on stories written by the people in power. Think about it. Emperors didn't sit around writing, "Today I oppressed half my empire. Feeling cute, though." No, they hired scribes to make them look good. History became PR. So what we end up with is a curated version of events. The good stuff is amplified, the bad stuff conveniently left out. For example, ancient Greece is remembered for democracy, but only 10 to 15% of the population could actually vote. The rest were women, slaves, foreigners. They were just living the background. The Islamic Golden Age brought massive scientific progress, but behind the libraries were court intrigues, assassinations, and brutal power plays. The Renaissance gave us Da Vinci and Michelangelo, also gave us witch trials, child labor, and really awkward corsets. It's not about being negative, it's about being honest. Golden for whom? This is the real question. Golden for whom? Because a time that felt amazing for philosophers and rulers could have been a total nightmare for almost everyone else. Take ancient Rome. From the outside, epic roads, aqueducts, beautiful marble buildings, and Caesar giving dramatic speeches. But for slaves, it was backbreaking work, cruelty, and zero rights. For women, they were basically property. For anyone who stepped out of line, one-way ticket to the gladiator arena. So yeah, Golden Ages weren't a group discount. They were VIP experiences for the elite. Everyone else was just part of the scenery. The cleanup crew of history. Here's another fun fact. Every Golden Age had a cleanup crew. You know, the people doing the dirty work while the rich made statues of themselves. Who built the pyramids? Not the pharaohs. Who maintained the libraries and translated the books? Mostly unnamed scholars and scribes. Who paid the price when empires went to war to show off their greatness? Ordinary citizens, farmers, poor families, children. And when disasters struck, plagues, famines, uprisings, it was usually these same people who suffered the most. But when history is written, their voices are left out, their struggles are footnotes, their names gone. That's why we need to zoom out and see the full picture, because ignoring them is like watching a movie with only the blooper reel cut out. You miss the whole story. The danger of a pretty past. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so what if we idolize a little? Everyone needs a good bedtime story now and then. True. But here's the danger. If we only remember the good old days, we stop asking questions. And when we stop asking questions, history becomes a tool, a weapon. Leaders today love using the idea of a golden past to stir up emotions. They'll say things like, "We need to return to our former glory. Back when our people were strong and pure. Our ancestors built greatness. We've lost our way." So, were there any good parts? Yes, definitely. Golden Ages weren't fake. They just weren't perfect. They gave the world incredible inventions, deep philosophy, gorgeous architecture, and moments of real genius. People did rise, ideas flourished, art exploded, but it all came at a cost. And that's what this documentary is about. Not to tear down history, but to balance the scale, to show the light and the shadows. Because real history isn't a fairy tale. It's a human story, messy, complicated, and full of contradictions. Wrapping up the myth. So next time someone says, "We need another golden age," ask them this: for who? At what cost? And who gets left out this time? Because history isn't just what happened, it's also what was hidden and what we choose to remember.
Greece, philosophy, art, and slavery. The birthplace of Western civilization, but not freedom for all. When people talk about ancient Greece, it sounds like the historical version of heaven. Democracy, wisdom, sculptures of dudes with perfectly chiseled abs. Philosophers walking around in togas dropping quotes like TikTok influencers. Know thyself. The unexamined life is not worth living. I think, therefore oh wait, that's Descartes, never mind. But let's pause the admiration for a minute. Yes, ancient Greece gave the world a lot. Philosophy, mathematics, theater, but it also gave us slavery, sexism, and a version of democracy that would make your local voting office cry. So let's take a closer look. Athens, the OG democracy. Kinda. Athens is often called the birthplace of democracy. And technically, yeah, they invented the idea that citizens should have a say in how things are run. Sounds great, right? Well, before you grab your laurel wreath and start praising the ancient Greeks for inventing freedom, here's the fine print. In Athens, only about 10 to 15% of the population could vote. That's it. The lucky few? Male, over 18, freeborn, Athenian parents, land-owning, preferably, and probably wore a nice robe. Everyone else? Tough luck. No vote for women,
slaves, foreigners, poor laborers, anyone who couldn't grow a beard, probably. So yeah, not exactly an inclusive democracy. It was more like an exclusive club where you needed a toga and a solid family tree to get in. The backbone of brilliance. Here's the part history textbooks like to skip past quickly. Ancient Greece ran on slavery. All that freedom people brag about, it was built on the labor of people who had none. Estimates say Athens alone had over 100,000 slaves, about 1/3 of the population. These weren't just prisoners of war. Many were born into it. Some were kidnapped. Some sold by their own families in hard times. They worked in homes, fields, factories, and even silver mines under brutal conditions. Meanwhile, their Athenian masters debated ethics and justice at fancy symposiums. The irony is, they literally had slaves serving wine while discussing the nature of freedom. You couldn't make this stuff up. Women in ancient Greece, seen, not heard. If you thought being a slave in Greece was bad, being a woman wasn't exactly sunshine and olive oil either. In Athens, women were expected to stay indoors, obey their fathers, then their husbands, not attend political meetings, and definitely not be seen talking to men in public. Basically, women were expected to be like furniture, useful, silent, and decorative. Even brilliant minds like Aristotle thought women were deformed males. Yes, he actually said that. So while men were off discussing the universe, women were often locked away raising children and weaving fabric. Of course, there were exceptions. Sparta, for instance, gave women more freedom and muscles, but that's another story. Philosophy and art, but for whose benefit? There's no denying that Greece was a cultural powerhouse. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle laid the groundwork for Western thinking. They asked deep questions. What is justice? What is virtue? What makes a life worth living? Playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides wrote tragedies that are still performed today. Architects designed temples so perfect, even modern builders scratch their heads. But again, who actually got to enjoy these things? A tiny slice of the population. The philosophers didn't really teach the masses. Their audiences were mostly elite young men. And the fancy plays in Athens theaters? Funded by the state, sure, but mainly attended by those who could afford a day off. So while we celebrate Greek wisdom, let's remember that much of it came from a privileged bubble. War, glory, and not so noble motives. Greece wasn't one big happy family either. The city-states, like Athens, Sparta, Corinth, were often at war with each other. The Peloponnesian War alone lasted nearly 30 years and left a trail of destruction. Sparta, for example, was basically a military state. Kids were trained to fight from the age of 7. Compassion was not part of the curriculum. Athens, for all its talk of justice, had its dark side too, like the time it voted to kill every man on an enemy island and enslave the women and children. Golden Age? Or just gold-plated weapons? Myth versus reality. Let's be honest. Ancient Greece feels glorious because we've spent centuries polishing its image. We put its philosophers on pedestals. We quote its wisdom. We build universities that look like the Parthenon. But the truth is, ancient Greece was a complex, messy, often brutal place, just like any other civilization. Yes, it gave the world powerful ideas, but those ideas were tested, twisted, and sometimes ignored entirely by the very people who preached them. Freedom? Only for a few. Democracy? Sort of. Wisdom? Plenty, but applied selectively. What can we learn? So, should we cancel ancient Greece? Throw away the statues? No. This chapter isn't about tearing it down. It's about seeing it clearly. Because when we understand the full story, the brilliance and the brutality, we stop worshiping the past and start learning from it. Greece didn't give us a perfect world, but it gave us something better: the tools to question the world around us, even if it didn't always use them properly. So, next time someone says, "We need to return to the values of ancient Greece," just ask them, "Cool, are you okay with 100,000 slaves and 0 rights for women?" That usually ends the conversation.
Rome. Order, power, and brutality. The empire that gave us law, roads, and public executions. Ah, Rome. The big one. The empire that built roads straight enough to shame Google Maps, invented indoor plumbing before we figured out modern pipes, and gave us the Latin language, which nobody speaks, but somehow shows up in every legal document ever. Rome is often treated like the overachieving big brother of history. Powerful, organized, sophisticated. We think of togas, marble columns, gladiator fights, and dramatic speeches that always seem to end with, "Et tu, brute?" But like any overachiever, Rome had a dark side. A very dark side. So while we admire its achievements, let's also take a walk down the back alley of Roman greatness, where blood, control, and fear did a lot of the heavy lifting. Pax Romana, peace, or quiet terror. Let's start with a phrase historians love, Pax Romana. It means Roman peace, a roughly 200-year period when the empire was stable, prosperous, and relatively calm. Sounds lovely, right? Except that this peace came with a catch. You had peace if you didn't challenge Rome, if you paid your taxes, if you kept your head down, and if you didn't mind the occasional public execution just to remind everyone who was boss. Rome's peace wasn't a warm hug, it was a heavy boot on your neck that didn't move unless you flinched. Building an empire with blood. Rome's empire didn't build itself on good vibes and positive thinking. It was built through conquest, occupation, forced labor, and a whole lot of submit or die speeches. They marched across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, swallowing cities like popcorn. If you resisted, they destroyed your town. If you submitted, they taxed you into eternity. Yes, they brought roads and aqueducts, but they also brought chains and legions. That all roads lead to Rome saying? It's true, because Rome built those roads to move soldiers and control the provinces faster. Efficiency meet oppression. Law and order for some. Rome loved law. They wrote it down, carved it into stone, and treated it like a divine gift to the world. And to be fair, they laid the foundation for modern legal systems. But Roman law didn't treat everyone the same. Rich Roman citizens got trials, lawyers, and fine wine. Poor people, quick punishments. Slaves, no rights at all. You could kill your slave and face absolutely nothing. Justice was more of a privilege than a principle. And if you were part of a group Rome didn't like early Christians or barbarians, you could end up crucified, fed to lions, or burned alive as part of a light show. Yes, Emperor Nero actually did that. Human torches. Very creative, very horrifying. The glory of Rome wasn't cheap. Let's talk architecture. Rome gave us the Colosseum, the Pantheon, massive bathhouses, monumental arches and statues. Amazing stuff. But how were these wonders built? Mostly by slaves, prisoners of war, and the poorest citizens. The Colosseum itself, a symbol of Roman pride, was built using Jewish slaves captured during the siege of Jerusalem. And those same buildings hosted events where people were stabbed, eaten by animals, or forced to kill each other for sport. Bread and circuses, they called it. Keep the people fed and entertained, and they won't question anything. Great for the crowds, not so great for the guy in the arena. Entertainment or public torture. Let's not sugarcoat it. Roman entertainment was brutal. Gladiator games weren't like today's MMA. There were no gloves, no referees, and definitely no mercy. Prisoners, slaves, and sometimes criminals were thrown into the arena and forced to fight to the death. Sometimes they were made to reenact battles where one side was given real weapons and the other side wasn't. It was violent, it was bloody, and the crowd loved it. Imagine watching a man get eaten by a lion while munching roasted chickpeas. That's not a golden age. That's a horror movie. Emperors, divine and deranged. The Roman Empire gave us some fascinating emperors. Some were brilliant, like Augustus or Marcus Aurelius. And others were, well, they made reality TV look tame. Let's name a few highlights. Caligula declared himself a god, made his horse a senator, and possibly married his sister. Nero set parts of Rome on fire, blamed it on Christians, and then sang songs while it burned. Commodus fought in the Colosseum, not because he had to, but because he liked killing people in front of a crowd. Absolute power? It didn't just corrupt, it threw a toga party for madness. And regular citizens? They just had to smile, clap, and hope they didn't get executed for blinking wrong. Colonies in all but name. Rome loved calling its conquered lands provinces. It sounds polite, formal, organized. But let's call them what they were. Colonies. Rome extracted wealth from these areas, installed their own rulers, and expected complete loyalty. If a local leader got too proud, Rome replaced him. If the people rebelled, massacre. Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul, modern-day France, is still remembered. Mostly because he wiped out over 1 million people. Golden Age? More like golden rule. Rome wins, everyone else deals with it. What Rome teaches us. Look, Rome left behind some pretty impressive stuff. Its ideas about governance, engineering, military tactics, and law shaped the modern world. But let's not pretend it was a utopia. Rome was brutal. It was a machine built to conquer, control, and entertain through violence. It created beauty, but funded it with blood. That doesn't make it less fascinating. It just makes it more real. Because once you take off the gold-tinted glasses, you see Rome for what it was. A powerhouse of genius and cruelty, ambition and arrogance, glory and gore. The Islamic Golden Age. Science, culture, and fragile tolerance. When the world looked to the east for light, and then the candles went out. Let's rewind to a time when Europe was deep in the so-called Dark Ages. Think plagues, pitchforks, and a strong fear of bathwater. Meanwhile, across the Islamic world, things were, well, glowing. Between the 8th and 14th centuries, cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, Damascus, and Cairo became the brains of the world. While Western Europe was still debating if the Earth was flat, Muslim scholars were mapping the stars, doing surgery, and translating Greek philosophy like it was trending. This period is often called the Islamic Golden Age. And to be fair, it really did shine. But as always, history isn't one color. So let's dim the romantic lighting just a little and see what else was going on behind the curtain. It started with a spark. After the rise of Islam in the 7th century, the Islamic world expanded fast. And unlike most empires that conquer and chill, the caliphates got curious. They didn't just want land, they wanted knowledge. So they started collecting it from Persia, Greece, India, and even China. They translated books, studied them, challenged them, and improved them. A library in Baghdad, known as the House of Wisdom, became the Google of its day, minus the data tracking. Scholars from all religions and backgrounds worked together here. Muslims, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians. It wasn't perfect harmony, but it was remarkably open-minded for the time. The result? An Islamic and cultural explosion. Math, medicine, and the moon. Let's talk achievements, because this era had a lot. Al-Khwarizmi literally invented algebra. Yep, that math test you hated, blame him. Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, wrote a medical encyclopedia used in Europe for centuries. Alhazen laid the foundations of the scientific method while experimenting with optics. Al-Biruni calculated the Earth's radius with scary precision using sticks in shadows. Muslim astronomers charted the stars, named constellations, and even built astrolabes, fancy ancient GPS devices. Architects designed mosques so beautiful they make modern buildings look like sad shoeboxes. This wasn't just a blip in history. For hundreds of years, the Islamic world led the planet in science, medicine, philosophy, and engineering. It was the era of brains, books, and breakthroughs. But here's the thing about open-mindedness. It's fragile. The caliphates were built on power as much as philosophy. While scholars were doing algebra and gazing at stars, rulers were, well, doing ruler things. Fighting rivals, crushing rebellions, throwing court rivals into rivers. Seriously? And sometimes using scholars as political tools. The moment a ruler felt threatened by a new idea, that idea could go from revolutionary to blasphemous overnight. And when religious fundamentalism started creeping in, tolerance took a nosedive. So, yes, knowledge flourished, but it also had to survive power games. The brain of the world then burned to ashes. Baghdad, during the Abbasid Caliphate, was next level. Imagine a city with vast libraries, hospitals open to all religions, scientists debating under candlelight, poetry, music, and coffee houses. Yep, they invented those too. It was the crown jewel of the Islamic Golden Age. But in 1258, the Mongols invaded. And they didn't just conquer, they flattened. They burned the libraries, killed scholars, and dumped so many books into the Tigris River that, according to legend, the water ran black with ink. It was a tragic mic drop moment in history. One of the greatest centers of learning, gone in a flash. And the Golden Age? It never really recovered. Tolerance. Real, but limited. Let's talk about the part people either overhype or ignore: religious tolerance. Yes, the Islamic Golden Age was more tolerant than many other empires at the time. Non-Muslims, called dhimmi, were allowed to live, worship, and work, usually with relative freedom. But they also paid a special tax, jizya, had fewer rights, and were often second-class citizens. So while it wasn't total oppression, it also wasn't full equality. Think of it as, you can stay, but don't get too comfortable. And over time, tolerance became more fragile, especially when politics and religious conservatism started mixing like oil and fire. The decline. What went wrong? Golden ages don't die in a single day. They fade, slowly, painfully. Several things caused the decline. Internal divisions, civil wars, rival dynasties and power struggles. Mongol invasions, total devastation of major cities. Rise of religious orthodoxy. Scholars were silenced, books banned. European rise. As Europe began its own renaissance, the Islamic world became more defensive and closed off. And just like that, the age of discovery turned into an age of fear. Science became suspicion. Philosophy became heresy. And the libraries stopped growing. What remains? The legacy of the Islamic Golden Age still lives on in math books, medical journals, star charts, and university names. But more importantly, it teaches us a powerful lesson. A society can be curious, diverse, and brilliant until fear takes over. Knowledge thrives in freedom. It dies in fear. And every golden age, no matter how bright, can go dark if it forgets that. Final thoughts. The Islamic Golden Age wasn't just a time of scholars in turbans solving math equations. It was a moment in human history when cooperation across cultures actually worked. For a while, it was beautiful, complicated, and yes, fragile. So let's remember it for what it was. Not a perfect past, but proof of what's possible when we value ideas over ego and wisdom over walls.